Every Clone Wars recap calls Anakin Skywalker reckless, unconventional, ambitious. 7 seasons of documented battlefield conduct get compressed into 3 adjectives that make him sound like a temperamental chess player who occasionally knocks pieces off the board. Brilliant, volatile, effective. These words appear in academic analyses of the prequel era, in the official vocabulary of tie-in materials, in retrospectives that spend hours on the show, while systematically failing to arrive at what the show actually depicts. They aren't factually wrong, exactly. He was reckless. He was unconventional. Under any coherent application of the laws of armed conflict, he was also a serial violator across all 7 seasons. Documented instances of false surrender, weaponized twice across the full run of the series. Prisoner torture executed in custody. Violence deployed against a civilian senator out of jealousy during a period when no battlefield was anywhere nearby. And a systematic pattern of moral compromise that escalated in precision and calculation every time the institution around him converted a line crossed into a personality trait. Reckless is what you call it when you're admiring the outcome. War criminal is what you call it when you're accounting for the method. This is the lower altitude. A chronological prosecution, using specific episodes and specific legal frameworks, built around the distinction between what happened and how everyone agreed to describe it. One note on the framework before the case file opens. Because war crime shouldn't function as a rhetorical intensifier for bad thing a soldier did, Protocol 1, Article 37 of the Geneva Conventions defines perfidy as acts that invite the confidence of an adversary with intent to betray it. False surrender offers are named among its explicit examples. Common Article 3 of the same framework prohibits violence to life and person, cruel treatment, and torture of any detained individual, regardless of combatant classification and regardless of the operational urgency of the information sought. International Humanitarian Law imposes proportionality. Military operations must weigh anticipated military advantage against civilian cost, and the principle of distinction, which prohibits targeting non-combatants as a deliberate military instrument. These standards exist because the people who drafted them had already watched what happens when armed conflict proceeds without them. Anakin Skywalker operated in exactly those conditions for the full duration of the Clone Wars. The record begins in Season 1. Season 1, Ryloth, The Architecture of False Surrender. Season 1, Episode 19, Storm over Ryloth. The CIS naval blockade has sealed the planet. Below the fleet, Twi'lek civilians have been cut off from Republic supply lines, food, medicine, material support, while separatist warships under Admiral Martuk hold formation in orbit with no particular urgency. They aren't in a hurry. The tactical position favors patience. What happened before Anakin's next move matters for the legal analysis. Ahsoka Tano, on her first independent command, led a Republic fighter squadron into the blockade formation and lost it completely. Every pilot is dead. She made an aggressive call, and it cost everyone who flew with her. Anakin's remaining flagship has sustained damage from the engagement. Martuk, observing from his command ship, has just watched the Republic's fighter wing destroy itself against his formation without losing a single vessel of his own. By all observable indicators at this moment in the episode, the battle has been decided in the CIS's favor. Anakin opens a communication channel to Martuk's flagship. What follows is constructed rather than improvised, and the construction is what makes it legally significant. Anakin's manner on the channel is measured, not theatrical, not the voice of someone performing under visible strain. He presents a surrender offer in a register calibrated for plausibility, because the context genuinely supports it. His fighter wing is destroyed. His ship is damaged. From Martuk's vantage point, observing what Anakin knows Martuk can observe, this looks like the situation that produces a surrender. The offer has supporting evidence in the observable battlefield conditions. Anakin deploys that context deliberately, as the load-bearing structure of the deception. Martuk responds as any commander would respond to a credible surrender signal. he begins reconfiguring his fleet. The combat formation that held the blockade tight shifts to the posture appropriate for receiving a surrendering vessel. His warships reposition. The gap opens. The specific gap, the avenue into his formation, is created directly by the repositioning his fleet executes in good faith response to what Martuk has institutional and legal reason to treat as a protected, reliable signal. Under the laws of armed conflict, surrender is a protected act precisely because the gesture has to mean something stable. If commanders can't trust that a surrender offer is a surrender offer, combatants in genuinely losing positions can never use the mechanism to stop fighting, because the mechanism has been converted into a weapon. Martuk extends that trust. Anakin abandons his ship. He programs it on a direct collision course into the reconfigured formation and leaves. The ship punches through the gap that Martuk's repositioning created in direct response to the offer. The resulting chaos opens an avenue for the rest of the Republic fleet. Twi'lek civilians receive supplies. The blockade breaks. Anakin files this as a victory. Under Protocol 1, Article 37, it's perfidy. The word matters because the legal definition is precise. Perfidy requires the betrayal of confidence extended in good faith. The surrender offer is the functional weapon. Anakin couldn't have executed the operation without Martuk's good faith response to the gesture, which means the offer's apparent legitimacy is what broke the blockade. You can't read that charitably and sustain the position that the violation was anything other than deliberate. He designed it, executed it, and won. The legal logic of why this damages something beyond the immediate engagement? The next time a Republic officer offers genuine surrender to a separatist commander who fought at Ryloth, that commander has reasons to wonder. The protection on surrender offers isn't a courtesy. It exists because warfare without it produces conditions where combatants in losing positions can't stop fighting, because the mechanism for stopping has been rendered untrustworthy. Anakin made that calculation on behalf of every combatant in the war who came after him. A fair prosecution names the counter-evidence, especially when it's inconvenient. Here it is. Earlier in Season 1, on Christophsis, Obi-Wan Kenobi faked surrender negotiations with separatist forces to buy time for Ahsoka and Anakin to destroy a separatist shield generator. The legal category is identical. Protocol 1, Article 37, perfidy, same article. Obi-Wan committed the same violation in the same season at an earlier point in the war. The distinction the prosecution turns on isn't whether the violation occurred. It did, in both cases. But what each person did with it afterward. Obi-Wan crossed this line in a specific moment under specific conditions, and the documented record contains no second instance. Anakin filed the tactic. He would be back in front of a separatist commander 6 seasons later, executing the same play with considerably more confidence, a narrower interval between the decision and the performance, and without the destroyed fighter wing and damaged ship that originally supplied the plausible context. One lapse and one methodology are analytically different categories. That distinction is where the prosecution's interest lies, and the evidence that supports it runs through the full span of the series. Season 2, Geonosis, what interrogation actually looked like. Season 2 returns Anakin to Geonosis, the planet where the Clone Wars started on the ground. The Republic is attempting to shut down a separatist weapons program, actively producing casualties in the current theater. Clone soldiers are dying from a weapon whose countermeasures a specific person in CIS command understands. That person has been captured. He isn't offering information voluntarily. Geonosian Archduke Poggle the Lesser commanded this planet's industrial infrastructure throughout the war, the same infrastructure that manufactured the separatist droid army that the Republic has been fighting since the beginning. In the hierarchy of the CIS, he is a figure of genuine military significance. He is also, when Anakin enters the interrogation, a prisoner in Jedi custody. Anakin's interrogation method is force choking. This isn't psychological pressure, not isolation, not environmental manipulation, not the categories of coercive interrogation that exist in contested legal territory. Force choking is the direct application of physical suffering to a restrained individual through kinetic force manipulation. Poggle's airway constricts. The pressure builds. It's applied continuously, with Anakin present and in control of the degree of constriction, until information is produced. What is happening in the scene isn't ambiguous. A captive is being physically harmed by his captor as a deliberate mechanism for extracting information. Common Article 3 of the Geneva Conventions prohibits violence to life and person, cruel treatment, and torture of detained persons. The prohibition carries no exception clause for operational urgency, no carve-out for the quality of intelligence the detainee holds, and no provision based on the detainee's classification under the laws of war. It applies to Poggle regardless of whether he is categorized as a prisoner of war, a civilian leadership figure, or an unlawful combatant. Common Article 3 made this protection unconditional by design, because conditional protection disappears precisely when the pressure for exceptions is highest. A protection that dissolves under sufficient urgency isn't a protection. It's a policy with an escape clause that powerful actors will always find the urgency to activate. The ticking clock argument, that acute military need justifies acute physical coercion, is among the oldest defenses for torture in the history of armed conflict. Its persistence isn't evidence of its legitimacy. Anakin gets the information. The weapons program is addressed. The immediate military problem is resolved. These facts are true, and they aren't the same as the interrogation being lawful. What happens next is the institutional mechanism the prosecution considers as significant as the interrogation itself. No council member raises the conduct for formal review. No procedural consequence follows for the Geonosis arc. The vocabulary surrounding Anakin's performance in this theater remains consistent with what it had been in Season 1. Unconventional, results-driven, effective. These descriptions are doing substantial structural work. Converting a method into a personality trait rather than a violation is the difference between Anakin crossed a line and this is how Anakin operates. The second framing is considerably more useful to an institution that intends to keep deploying him, and considerably more corrosive for the person being described, who receives the implicit message that the line he crossed isn't actually where they drew it. The Palpatine thread. What silence communicates. Palpatine met Anakin Skywalker at the end of The Phantom Menace. The architecture of the relationship was consistent across years, where the Order called Anakin's emotional life a liability and required detachment as doctrine. Palpatine called him exceptional and validated every feeling the Order told him to suppress. Where the Council exercised authority through institutional control of his rank, his missions, and the structural conditions of his entire existence, Palpatine offered what presented as personal investment without coercive apparatus attached. The manipulation operated through Anakin's specific vulnerabilities, his grief, his unending attachment to the people he loved, and his justified distrust of an institution that simultaneously demanded emotional suppression and structured its most sensitive intelligence operations around the reliability of his emotional intensity. One real limitation in the record deserves acknowledgement. Palpatine's direct on-screen presence in the 2008 to 2020 Clone Wars animation is limited compared to his role in the prequel films. Specific Clone Wars episodes where he explicitly endorses Anakin's battlefield methods in direct conversation aren't the primary mode of the grooming arc as documented in the series. His most visible structural move in Clone Wars canon is political. He used his authority as Supreme Chancellor to place Anakin on the Jedi High Council, producing a council chamber in which one seat was occupied by a Jedi Knight, who simultaneously participated in internal council deliberations and reported their content to the Chancellor. Anakin heard the council's strategic assessments and relayed them to Palpatine. The council, aware of this arrangement, allowed it to continue. The political cost of refusing the Chancellor's recommendation was complicated, and naming the structural conflict of interest required acting on it. Neither option was more appealing than maintaining the arrangement and watching the problem from inside the room they'd invited it into. Each time the Council responded to a violation with silence, Palpatine's position was confirmed without him needing to deliver a message directly. The Order doesn't hold you accountable because it needs you more than it trusts you, and I am the one who sees what you actually are. Ryloth filed under creative. Geonosis filed under results-driven. Every conversion of a violation into a personality trait by the institution Anakin was supposed to respect landed in exactly the space Palpatine had been occupying for years. He didn't need to appear in every episode. He needed the Council's inaction to keep running, and it did. Season 4, Episodes 11 to 13. Ziggeria, Operations Inside a Slave Empire. Kidnapped, Season 4, Episode 11. Slaves of the Republic, Season 4, Episode 12. Escape from Cadavo, Season 4, Episode 13. The CIS is backing the Zygerrian slave empire, which has enslaved an entire colony of Togruta colonists, thousands of people stripped of their names, their property, and their legal existence, held on a planet built for exactly this purpose. Anakin, Obi-Wan, Ahsoka, and Captain Rex mount an undercover operation to locate and extract them. Anakin's cover identity is slave trader. He arrives at the Zygerrian court presenting Padme Amidala, his secret wife, as a slave for sale, to secure an audience with Queen Mirage Sintel and penetrate the court's power structure. The operational logic holds in the abstract. Access to the slaving infrastructure requires arriving as the kind of person that infrastructure wants to deal with. The Zygerrian court deals in sentient beings as commodities. Anakin looks like someone bringing the court a prestigious acquisition. He succeeds in gaining the audience. The mission proceeds along the lines the plan required. Queen Mirage Sintel, recognizing his force capability, moves to install Anakin within the Zygerrian hierarchy. The official episode guide describes Anakin working to convince the Queen that she too is a slave and a pawn in a separatist plot, suggesting both that the undercover relationship is active and sophisticated, and that Anakin is simultaneously performing complicity while working to unravel the system he's performing complicity within. The show holds both elements at once without resolving the tension between them. The prosecution holds it the same way. Then a specific moment arrives in Slaves of the Republic that the case file does not move past quickly. During Anakin's time embedded at the Zygerrian court, one of Queen Mirage Sintel's enslaved subjects moves to assassinate the Queen. The enslaved woman has found a weapon. She is moving toward the person most directly responsible for her captivity, toward the institutional center of the system that holds her and everyone around her in bondage. The decision she has made is, within the logic of her situation, the only form of active resistance available to a person who has no legal recourse, no external army, and no expectation of rescue. She has calculated that she can reach the Queen. She is moving toward her. Anakin stops her. The room when this happens contains a queen who runs a functioning slave empire, an enslaved woman who has identified the only moment of possible action available to her, and a Republic Jedi general who came to dismantle the Empire. The short-term operational calculus for Anakin's intervention is coherent. If the Queen dies during his infiltration, the mission collapses. The Togruta colonists remain unreachable. The calculation of the operation produces the intervention. That framing is available to him and to the viewer simultaneously. But the physical reality at the moment it occurs is that a Jedi general used force capability against an enslaved person attempting to kill her enslaver, in a room where the enslaver is the person Anakin is protecting. Whatever the planning document shows about long-term mission objectives, in the immediate geometry of that room, Anakin chose the Queen. The colonists' eventual rescue doesn't appear in the room at that moment. His hand does, and what it's protecting. The prosecution doesn't flatten this into a clean verdict. Undercover intelligence operations have always required engagement with the infrastructure being dismantled, and the longer-term result carries weight. But the Ziggeria arc sits inside a structural incoherence the Republic never resolved: its strategic military alliance with the Hutt cartel, maintained throughout the full duration of the Clone Wars, provided the Republic's Outer Rim logistics infrastructure, while the Hutt cartel ran slave operations in adjacent systems with the Republic's studied indifference in return. Anakin mounted an undercover mission to liberate Togruta colonists from Zyggerian slavery, while serving an army in active alliance with parties doing functionally identical things to other sentient beings. He was the Republic's instrument in both directions simultaneously, deployed into the contradiction without anyone requiring the contradiction to be resolved. The moral incoherence wasn't primarily his. He lived inside it anyway, and operated within it, and never named it in terms that arrived at the institutional level. Season 6, The Clovis Incident. When the War Disappears. The Zyggerian arc concerns combat operations in a hostile theater. The Rush-Clovis incident in Season 6's The Rise of Clovis arc is something else entirely, and that difference is exactly why the prosecution includes it. Rush-Clovis is a representative in the Galactic Senate, a civilian political figure with a diplomatic role in the banking clan negotiations that Season 6 centers on, and a person with a romantic history with Padme Amidala. He isn't a combatant. He isn't a separatist commander. He isn't armed in a way that creates a military threat. He exists in Season 6 in the context of political maneuvering and financial crisis, not battlefield engagement. Anakin beats him savagely. Not in a tactical engagement, not in defense of a military objective, not while Clovis is in possession of anything that constitutes a weapon in a context where that would matter. Out of jealousy over his history with Padme, the attack is sustained and personal, and Clovis isn't presenting meaningful resistance when most of it occurs. The laws of armed conflict distinguish between combatants and non-combatants because the protection of civilians from military violence is foundational to the entire humanitarian framework. But Season 6 doesn't even require that framework to identify what this incident is. It's a decorated military general using combat capability against a civilian senator in a context with no battlefield anywhere near it. No operational necessity, no military objective served, no enemy combatant classification that could even be constructed to apply. The vocabulary of unconventional and results-driven has nothing to attach to here, because the results being achieved aren't military. The result is a badly beaten Senate representative. What makes this particularly significant to the chronological record is the category of its motivation. Every prior incident in this case file carries some structure of battlefield rationalization available to the person committing it. Strategic necessity, intelligence value, operational cover, mission parameters. The Clovis incident provides none of that. It's Anakin's darkness, operating without the war as cover, which means the methods are no longer contained within the category of warfare. By Season 6, the violence is portable. It travels with him into rooms where no military logic applies, and no institutional vocabulary exists to translate it back into anything defensible. Season 4, Episodes 15 to 18. Rako Hardeen, The Council's Own Methods. A conspiracy to assassinate Palpatine has been discovered. The Jedi Council, Obi-Wan, Yoda, and Mace Windu specifically, devise a plan to infiltrate the network. Obi-Wan will fake his own death, undergo physical transformation via nanotechnology to resemble bounty hunter Rako Hardeen, and embed inside the conspiracy from the ground level. Deception. Season 4, Episode 15. Obi-Wan is publicly shot. An apparent assassination plays out in full. A Jedi funeral follows. Anakin attends. His grief is unconstrained and specific. The grief of someone who has lost the person most central to his formation as a Jedi, his older brother as much as his master. The Council designed the operation to require exactly that reaction. The deception works as a deception because Anakin's grief looks authentic, and it looks authentic because it's authentic, and the Council built the operation around the certainty of its intensity. This is the moment that belongs on the Jedi Council's ledger in full capital letters. The institution that had told Anakin for years that his attachments were liabilities and required emotional detachment as its defining doctrine, selected the depth of his attachment to Obi-Wan as an operational instrument. His love for his master was the mechanism. The same doctrine that forbade the love was the same institution running the operation that needed the love to function. Both those things were simultaneously true in Season 4, Episodes 15 through 18. Obi-Wan, operating as Hardeen through Friends and Enemies in Episode 16, and the Box in Episode 17, spent weeks inside a network of dangerous bounty hunters, maintaining a criminal identity that required him to behave in ways a Jedi Knight isn't supposed to behave. Not the simulated suggestion of criminal behavior, but the actual performance of it, with real consequences if the identity broke. He attended his own funeral while his colleagues stood at it grieving. He watched Anakin process the loss from behind a fabricated face and stayed in character. Satine Kryze, who had believed the news of his death during the arc, received no information that it was staged. The show's evidence on this is clear. Her response when she eventually learns the truth carries the full weight of someone who had genuinely believed she had lost him. Crisis on Naboo, Season 4, Episode 18. The mission concludes. Obi-Wan comes back. What the Rako Hardeen arc reveals about the institution around him is as significant as what it reveals about Obi-Wan. The Council built its most sensitive intelligence operation around the emotional certainties of a man whose emotional life it had always characterized as dangerous. They needed Anakin's grief to look real because it was real, and they used it with precision and without apparent hesitation. That is the Jedi Order's relationship with its own doctrine on display, applied to Anakin everywhere, except the places where his feelings were operationally useful to Council plans. The Council's credibility as a source of moral guidance depends on consistency between what it requires and how it behaves. Seasons 4, Episodes 15 through 18 are evidence in that case, not in Anakin's. Obi-Wan's ledger, the full accounting. The prosecution's counterweight argument is only meaningful if the weight on Obi-Wan's side is actually documented. Here is the full ledger. Qui-Gon Jinn, killed by Darth Maul at the end of The Phantom Menace. Obi-Wan watched his master die, killed Maul in the same fight, and then honored Qui-Gon's dying request by taking Anakin as his Padawan, inheriting, in the same moment he lost the person who formed him, the full weight of a responsibility his dying master had sought, and the Order had debated, and which Obi-Wan accepted on the terms the dying man asked for. He was 25 years old. He had been a Padawan 24 hours earlier. The grief and the responsibility arrived simultaneously, and he carried both. The Rako Hardeen operation, his own public death, his own funeral, weeks of criminal identity, Satine uninformed, Anakin deceived completely. The Jedi Council approved all of it. His flagship, the Negotiator, destroyed by General Grievous in 20 BBY, an attack that cost him his ship and his crew in a direct engagement with the Republic's most consistently lethal opposing commander. Then, Season 5, Episode 16, The Lawless. Darth Maul kills Duchess Satine Kryze while Obi-Wan is present and unable to prevent it. Savage Opress is with Maul on Mandalore, and the two of them have seized control of the planet with Death Watch's support. Satine had sent a distress call. Obi-Wan came. It's a trap. Multiple earlier episodes across Season 2 and Season 5 had established what Satine was to him. The woman he loved. The life that forked away when he chose to remain with the Order. She exists in the series specifically as the living evidence of what that choice cost. She is what he gave up, walking around in the world, periodically in the same room as him, confirmed as real and present and still there by every episode that put them together under pressure. Obi-Wan loved her. He chose the Order over a life with her. Both those things are in the show, documented across multiple seasons, which is why Maul chose this. Maul doesn't kill Satine incidentally. He kills her as a calibrated instrument of maximum psychological damage, using his knowledge of Obi-Wan's interior as the weapon. He says it explicitly. He wants Obi-Wan to feel what Obi-Wan made him feel when he killed him on Naboo. The loss of someone central to your existence, delivered by someone with the power to choose that method and the desire to use it. He knows exactly where Obi-Wan is most exposed. He uses that knowledge with precision. This isn't collateral damage. It's targeted. Obi-Wan holds Satine while she dies. She speaks to him. Then she is gone, and he is still on Mandalore, still inside Death Watch's stronghold, still in a situation that requires survival over grief if he is going to survive at all. He escapes. He reports back. The war continues. The prosecution is also honest about what the ledger contains on Obi-Wan's side. He and Mace Windu participated in the coercive interrogation of Cad Bane. This is documented. The simplest version of the counterweight argument, Obi-Wan never crossed any line, isn't what this case file is defending, because it isn't accurate. The case being made here is more specific. Neither the cumulative weight of Obi-Wan's losses nor the specific violations he committed produced anything resembling the escalating, systematic pattern documented in Anakin's chronological record. The Cad Bane interrogation is a data point. Ryloth in Season 1, followed by Urbana in Season 7, with Geonosis and Clovis and Ziggeria between them, is a trajectory. Those are different things analytically, and the distinction matters for the prosecution's actual claim. Season 5, Ahsoka's expulsion, the institution's self-indictment. Ahsoka Tano was falsely accused of bombing the Jedi Temple in Season 5. The evidence against her was fabricated by Barriss Offee. The Jedi Council processed that evidence through a formal framework of justice, reached the verdict it supported, and expelled her from the Order. When the frame-up was exposed, the Council offered Ahsoka reinstatement and a formal apology. She declined both and walked away. She never came back. For Anakin, watching this run from inside the council chamber, during a period when he had already accumulated years of evidence about how the institution handled inconvenient situations, the Ahsoka expulsion was a real-time demonstration of institutional logic at its most revealing. The council had convicted someone he had trained, someone he loved, on fabricated evidence through a formal process designed to look like justice, and then offered the version of accountability that cost the institution the least. He wasn't wrong to see this as symptomatic of something structural. He had been watching the symptoms accumulate. What he did with that observation is where the case file locates the danger. From "the council failed Ahsoka" to "the council's judgments are fundamentally compromised" to "the norms the council enforces are therefore negotiable when the urgency is sufficient." That logic, applied to his own conduct, converts each prior violation from an exception into a precedent. The Ryloth play, the Geonosis interrogation, the Zygerrian protection of the slaver's queen, the Clovis incident, each individually justified on operational or personal grounds at the time, now carries the Ahsoka expulsion as supporting evidence for an implied syllogism. An institution that does this to the apprentice it raised hasn't earned the authority to tell a general where his lines are. The syllogism has serious problems. The Council's institutional failures don't authorize violations of the Geneva Conventions, and the chain of reasoning requires several logical steps that don't survive scrutiny. But Anakin wasn't doing legal analysis. He was accumulating. Palpatine had been patient about exactly this kind of accumulation for years, maintaining his position in the gap between what Anakin experienced and what the Order offered as explanation, waiting for the accumulation to reach the weight that would make it decisive. Season 7, Episode 9, Urbana, the tactic made personal. The war's final year, the Battle of Urbana. Anakin leads Republic forces against dug-in separatist positions, and the enemy commander is behind defensive lines that conventional pressure, flanking, and air support haven't cracked open. The assault requires drawing the commander out of a protected position. There is a direct way to accomplish this. Anakin walks toward the separatist lines alone. He is in the open ground between the two armies. He is broadcasting a communication toward the separatist position. He is presenting himself, his person, his identity as a Jedi general, his apparent availability as a captive, as the substance of a surrender offer. His posture as he moves across the open ground communicates the gesture that the laws of armed conflict are supposed to protect. A prominent enemy commander, exposed, in the open, apparently spent, offering personal capitulation. For the enemy commander holding a defensive position, a Jedi general surrendering personally mid-engagement is the most valuable intelligence prize available at that moment. The offer is credible. The context makes it credible. Anakin knows what makes it credible, and he constructs himself as the signal. The Separatist commander advances to receive it. Anakin's forces are already in position behind him. Protocol 1, Article 37, Perfidy. The same article as Ryloth, 7 seasons earlier, in the same series, committed by the same person. The recidivism is documented. But the comparison between the two incidents reveals something beyond mere recidivism, and the prosecution considers it the most analytically significant element of the chronological record. In Season 1, the false surrender at Ryloth required mechanical distance. Anakin stayed on his damaged ship, programmed it remotely, and evacuated before impact. The deception was designed and executed, but the weapon was the ship. Anakin created the false signal and then stepped away from it. The colliding vessel was the instrument of the betrayal, not his own person. He was one step removed from the performance itself. At Urbana in Season 7, Anakin is the performance, his own body crossing open ground, his own identity as a Jedi Knight constituting the bait. He is personally walking into the space between two opposing armies and using himself, specifically the trust that attaches to a Jedi Knight's gesture of surrender, as the instrument of the deception. The offer isn't a ship, it's him. He walks out under a signal he knows to be false. He holds the performance across open ground while the enemy commander advances, and then the trap closes. The personal investment has changed completely across 7 seasons. There is no longer any visible hesitation in the record between the decision and the execution. He doesn't need the damaged ship to supply credibility to the context, because he has been doing this long enough that his own presence and apparent vulnerability are sufficient. The tactic that Ryloth confirmed as effective has been refined to the point of comfortable personal deployment. The performance is intimate in a way the Season 1 play wasn't, which means the gap between these two incidents isn't just the passage of 6 seasons of war. It's the distance between a person who discovered that a tactic works and a person who has mastered it to the point where the ship, the planning, the external apparatus have all been internalized. At Ryloth, Anakin was learning. At Urbana, the learning was complete. The counter-argument that doesn't go away. Obi-Wan Kenobi was taken from his family before he had formed durable memories of them. He was raised from his earliest cognizant years inside a totalizing institution that managed every relationship, every sanctioned attachment, and every framework for understanding what a person is permitted to feel and want. He didn't choose the Jedi Order. He was inducted before he had a self that could meaningfully choose, and the Order ran the entirety of his psychological development from the inside. There was no version of a prior life accessible to him as a reference point, no experience of outside that would have made the inside visible as a constructed environment rather than simply reality. Anakin was 9 years old when he was taken from Tatooine. 9 years of his mother. 9 years of slave poverty, human connection, loss, and the specific texture of experiencing genuine autonomous choice and its absence. He knew what outside felt like. That reference was available to him every time the Order's doctrine struck him as arbitrary, which is to say, it made the doctrine feel more arbitrary than it might have felt to someone for whom the Order's reality was the only reality they had ever inhabited. The comparison between inside and outside was available to Anakin in ways it simply wasn't available to Obi-Wan, and that asymmetry isn't incidental to the divergence between them. If Obi-Wan's restraint is the product of conditioning so early and so total that he never developed a full opportunity to resist it in the ways Anakin did, then the restraint isn't virtue in the complete sense of the word. It's the output of a formation process he didn't consent to and couldn't have consented to. A person shaped so completely by an institution from such an early age that the institution's values and his own became genuinely indistinguishable from each other. That argument is real. It deserves to be stated without a trapdoor beneath it, because the easy version of the counterweight, Obi-Wan was simply better, collapses if the better is entirely the product of something done to him rather than chosen by him. What the argument can't fully account for is the directionality of what Obi-Wan actually did with his formation. Deep institutional conditioning, if it produces rigid compliance, should produce an Obi-Wan who suppresses attachment completely, defers to council judgment without friction, and follows the Order's doctrine as a closed system. The series doesn't show that person. He loved Satine, which the Order's doctrine explicitly prohibits. He participated in the Hardeen operation while clearly understanding what it cost Anakin, the understanding and the compliance existing simultaneously in him, not one canceling the other. He doubted, he grieved openly, he held contradictions that a perfectly conditioned institutional subject wouldn't have needed to hold, because those contradictions wouldn't have been available to a person who had never formed the attachments that produced them. The conditioning didn't produce a closed system. It produced someone with an enormous capacity for both attachment and restraint. Someone who could love Satine, watch her die in the specific way Maul designed her death, and not use that loss as the reason to burn down everything the loss was embedded in. Whether that capacity is character or conditioning is what the evidence in this case file does not resolve. It's the right question, and this prosecution leaves it open deliberately, because anyone who closes it quickly in either direction isn't taking it seriously. The final accounting. The Jedi Council didn't watch Anakin become dangerous through inattention. The framing that exonerates them through passivity isn't accurate. They watched the pattern form across multiple seasons, calculated the military value of continued deployment against the institutional cost of formally addressing his methods, and made a recurring choice to use vocabulary rather than accountability. Each time they said unconventional instead of prohibited, each mission order issued after a documented violation, each conversion of a line crossed into a personality trait. These were active institutional decisions communicating something to Anakin through the architecture of their response. Specifically, through the absence of consequence, they told him he existed outside the normal framework for accountability. He believed it because the evidence, across 7 seasons, kept supporting it. Mace Windu's documented distrust of Anakin is the irony the record preserves intact. A council member who was correct about the trajectory and never converted that correctness into formal action, inside an institution whose incentive structure ran consistently in the other direction. The Republic needed Anakin's victories. His methods produced them. The calculus that held him in the field was the same calculus, repeated, that told him the lines he was crossing didn't appear on the Council's map. Windu's distrust, never formalized into accountability, is the most precise possible description of institutional failure. Being right about the problem, while the problem keeps running because the institution's other incentives are stronger than the courage to act on being right. Palpatine built toward a specific outcome across the full span of this case file. By the time Revenge of the Sith arrives, outside the scope of these 7 seasons, but the destination toward which they run, he doesn't ask Anakin to do something new. He doesn't introduce a capacity that hadn't been developed. He activates what 7 seasons of escalation and institutional silence had already built and confirmed and reinforced at every stage. A man who had used surrender as a weapon twice, refining the performance from mechanical to personal across the span of the war. A man who had tortured a prisoner in custody and watched the Order convert the violation into a personality trait. A man who had operated inside a slave empire under conditions that required protecting a slaver, beaten a senator out of jealousy in a room with no battlefield anywhere near it, watched the institution he served convict an innocent apprentice, and offer a measured apology as closure.
A man whose most important relationship had been deliberately weaponized by the institution responsible for his moral formation. Palpatine needed all of that to be in place. The documented record indicates it was, season by season, incident by incident, conversion by conversion. Ahsoka calculated the institution and walked away. Obi-Wan stayed, lost everything the war could take from him, participated in specific violations this case file names honestly, and held the line across every category the catalog documents Anakin crossing. The Jedi Council knew the pattern was forming and chose the deployment every time. Palpatine planned across years with patience and precision. The galaxy paid the compound interest on all of it. The prosecution rests. Subscribe for more.